Hello there. Have you ever come across people complaining of swollen and painful joints? Or do they ever complain of having morning stiffness with their joints that usually takes hours to go away? Well, if not, then let's know that these conditions might be associated with a deadly bone disease called as rheumatoid arthritis. Arthritis is a chronic inflammatory condition that mostly affects the joints in the initial stages of the disease, but as the disease progresses, it might invade other organs of your body like your skin, your lungs, and affect them. To have a brief understanding of how the disease basically affects the joints, let's take a closer look at the anatomy of a healthy joint. Here we are taking an example of a healthy knee joint. We also call it as synovial joint. As you can see from the diagram, the two bones that are present in the knee joint, they are connected together by the help of an outermost covering. We call this covering as fibrous capsule. Inner to the fibrous capsule lies a thin membrane called as synovial membrane, the main function of which is to release the synovial fluid in this joint space. Also, the two bones are provided with a thin cushion-like covering. This basically acts as a lubricant and allows the bones to smoothly glide against each other. Coming back to rheumatoid arthritis is basically an autoimmune condition that actually arises as a result of interaction between the various genetic and the environmental factors. For example, a certain person with some genes for immune proteins, let's say for example HLA, the human leukocyte antigen gene, it might develop rheumatoid arthritis on getting exposed to cigarette smoke or certain pathogens that are present in the gut. As a result of this interaction, some proteins in our body get modified in their structure. Let's say for example type 2 collagen, vimentin is there, etc. And as a result of these modifications, the immune cells in the body get so much confused that they are unable to recognize these proteins as the self proteins of the body. Rather, they are now considered as antigens of the body. Now, these antigens are picked up by the antigen presenting cells and are carried to the lymph nodes of the body, where they stimulate a number of immune cells like the T cells and cause the release of specific antibodies. There are a large number of antibodies that are released into the lymph nodes. The most common among them is the RF, the rheumatoid factor antibody. It is basically an IgM antibody. Now these RF antibodies along with the T cells enter the circulation and are carried to this joint space. Once there, they cause the release of inflammatory proteins called as cytokines that cause the inflammation of the entire joint. Also, another function of these inflammatory cytokines is to stimulate the cells of synovial membrane for rapid proliferation. Once the synovial membrane gets proliferated, it becomes thicker and starts developing a granular structure. We call this granular synovial membrane now as pannus. Once the disease progresses, these antibodies, inflammatory cytokines, they just don't sit in the joint space now. Rather, they enter into the circulation and are carried to various body organs. For example, when they reach the brain, they stimulate the pyrogens over there and create fever. For example, in the skin, they cause the presence of rheumatoid nodules all over your body, etc. Besides these, there are some peculiar features that an arthritic patient shows. The first and the foremost among them is the arthritic patient has never one joint that is affected. It has multiple joints that are affected. The less number is 5 or more than 5 joints can also be affected. Also, in the initial stages of the disease, smaller joints are affected, and as the disease progresses, larger joints start getting affected. For example, initially the metacarpopharyngeal joints are affected, and later in the body, knees, elbows, the shoulders, etc. These bigger joints get affected. Also, as the disease progresses, the patient might experience flares, which is a term that is given to a condition of sudden worsening of the disease. Here the joints become swollen, they become warm, red and painful, etc. Coming to the diagnosis of the disease, this disease can be diagnosed in 2 different ways. First one is the blood test and second one is the X-ray examination. The blood tests are done to figure out the presence of the RF, which are basically the IgM antibodies in the blood. And the X-ray examinations are basically done to directly examine the bones for the presence of rheumatoid arthritis. This was all about rheumatoid arthritis. Thank you so much for staying connected. Have a good time.